dead man, a dead politician, has risen. This is the greatest comeback in political history.
We need to also factor in not only who's won, which is Trump, but who's lost, which is to say us.
This is my third year in a row at the WEF, and this is the first year that I sense panic. They know that Trump is not merely not on board with globalism, but he's a fierce anti-globalist. Your average conservative, their mindset is to get up in the morning and grab a cup of coffee and think about their day. The average leftist, the average WEFer, gets up in the morning, grabs a cup of coffee, and thinks about your day too. You know, that's just the way that they think. Well, here I am in Rome. I've come here straight from the World Economic Forum, and I'm standing in front of the Pantheon, the Hall of the Gods, as it was called, and the center of worship for an empire that had aspirations of ruling, of dominating the world. Well, the modern equivalent is Davos, Switzerland, where the World Economic Forum meets. Now, what you're going to see today is a mashup of the various interviews that I did from everyone from Dr. Drew all the way over to Rob TV and various others. So I think you're going to find that particularly helpful and insightful as these interviewers kind of tease out the issues. Then once I can get settled, either here or, in some other country, we'll sit down and have a direct conversation with you. Until that time, I'm going to enjoy this beautiful sunshine. I hope you enjoy this episode of Ideas Have Consequences.
Yesterday, on his first day back in office, President Trump took aim at the globalist institutions like the World Economic Forum, for one. He signed an executive order that underscores his administration's stance against policies that these elites seem to champion. And, of course, Trump has long criticized the forum for advancing agendas that, in his view, undermine our national sovereignty and agendas that impose unfair economic burdens on American taxpayers. And as part of this push, Trump signed an executive order withdrawing the U.S. from the Paris Climate Accord, which he and many others have criticized for its weak enforcement mechanisms and disproportionate demands that it has on the U.S., especially when you compare to countries like China. So what does this mean for environmental policies? What does it mean for global leadership and the growing influence of institutions like the World Economic Forum? Well, joining me now to break it all down is Larry Taunton. He's the executive director of the Fixed Point Foundation. Larry, welcome back to Washington Watch, and thank you for joining us from Switzerland.
It's a pleasure to be with you.
All right, so what are you hearing and what are you learning from the World Economic Forum so far? And specifically, how does it all align with or conflict with the priorities that the Trump administration has?
Well, let me begin by saying something about my strategy here. Now, you have a variety of reporters, conservative and otherwise, who are here, and they're here with their news teams, with their camera crews, and they are ambushing, in some cases, some of the people who are speaking at the forum. My approach is completely different. I just pretend to be a WEFer. That's what they call themselves, WEFers. They refer to the meeting itself as the WEF. And I just walk into every building like I own it and sit and listen to what they're saying. And the result of that is they tend to speak to you much more freely and openly. And I would say that this year, this is my third year in a row to attend, that what you're hearing is panic.
Because of Trump? Panic because of what specifically?
Well, the globalist agenda, yes, because of Trump. The globalist agenda hangs by a thread. And that is because, the United States has really been the keystone to the globalist agenda. If the U.S. falls, all other smaller boats are swamped. And we, of course, have been trending in that direction. But in November, that all took a massive swing in yet another direction. And of course, in the last 24 hours, Donald Trump has been inaugurated as president of the United States. And so far, he's done the things that he said he was going to do. And that is chiefly not simply take a, let's just say, a non-globalist position. He has taken a fierce anti-globalist position. And they see that as, as though he's some sort of hayseed and backward and somebody who just really doesn't understand what's good for mankind. But the World Economic Forum really isn't concerned with mankind. They're all about saving the planet and, of course, power.
Yep. And Trump, you're exactly right. I mean, Trump, he recognizes that these elites, as you just described them, they have their own agenda. They have their own interests, and that cuts against our own national sovereignty and our own economic freedom. And Trump is just pushing back majorly against that, and we saw it yesterday. So how does Trump's approach challenge the influence of institutions like the Forum? I mean, you said they're panicking, but this is going to the United States carries so much of the weight behind these, and now that we're cutting it off, that's going to be a major challenge for them to overcome, won't it?
Absolutely. I mean, let's just take one issue, one that I have spoken about on this show before, and that's immigration. As Tony would know, and others involved with Washington Watch, I have been tracking, following, accompanying some of the caravans that have been making their way to the United States border from all over South America, through Darien Gap, up to Mexico City, and then ultimately to the last jump off to the U.S. border. Now, how does that relate to the WEF? Well, you see, the WEF, globalist as they are, they're all on board with the whole open society agenda, which essentially means open borders. And so Trump coming into office, what is the first thing that he says he's going to do? He's going to close the border, and he's going to enforce a sensible immigration policy. Well, just an issue like that that's just one of many. That issue imperils their agenda. And part of their agenda in open borders is destabilization of a country like the United States, and to change overnight the social, political, and infrastructural nature of the United States. And yet here's Trump, who comes along and says, not only am I not a globalist, I'm an American patriot. And we're not going to have any more of this kind of nonsense. So you can imagine the kind of panic that is felt at a place like the World Economic Forum. Now, they're all trying to pretend like, whistling through the graveyard like this this is just perhaps a blip on their radar. But of course, it's a great deal more than that, and they know it.
Wow. Well, and withdrawing from the Paris Climate Accord also. I mean, it's just huge.
The World Health Organization.
Yeah, huge stuff here. Well, listen, Larry, I want to thank you so much for joining us. We're definitely going to have to bring you back and discuss some of this some more as all of this unfolds. There's so much taking place. But Larry Taunton, Executive Director of Fixed Point Foundation, thank you so much for joining us on Washington Watch.
Absolutely. It's always good to see you guys. Thanks for having me. You guys take care and keep up the good work.
Guys, I think you're really going to enjoy this. I'm welcoming back to the podcast my friend Larry Taunton. And this is becoming a little bit of an annual tradition here on this podcast. Larry is hard to describe. He's a little of many things. He's an author. He's a commentator. He's a columnist. He's sort of a raconteur. And as we'll find out, he's also a sleuth reporter who has an ability to sneak his way into things. In this case, the World Economic Forum. And the World Economic Forum is this kind of globalist annual meeting. I spoke at it myself many years ago, the early 2000s, I believe. And it's gotten worse and worse and worse. But Larry is there now, and so we're connecting with Larry. He's in his hotel room in Davos. You can follow Larry, by the way, at Larry Taunton, Taunton. Larry, welcome. Thanks for joining me from Davos. And let me begin. I want to talk about so many things, the things going on there. Trump's address to the Davos people this morning, today. But before we do, let me ask you, how do you pull off this feat? How do you make your way into Davos, and why are you there?
Yeah, well, one of the things that I try to do in my work, Dinesh, which I think you'd be familiar with, is that I want to work at both ends of the ideological spectrum. So, on the one hand, going to places like Davos or DC or Paris or London, where the policymakers are, Brussels, and listening to them, moving among them to understand the way that they think, and then watching how those ideas, once they're floated, how they're affecting people downstream from those ideas. So that might take me, for instance, to the third world, and see most of these people, the elitists who come to Davos, they're very insulated from their own ideas. And just by way of example, Ursula von der Leyen, who is she's the European Commission president. Now, she's one of the featured speakers. She's on the board of trustees for the World Economic Forum, and she's here to lecture us all on our carbon footprint. Now, when she arrived, she got out of Dinesh an Audi A8. And if people don't know what that is, this is the European version, which is a 12-cylinder 585 horsepower beast. Now, I frankly would love to own one, but I wouldn't go around lecturing people on their carbon footprint. But you see, they don't even see that as hypocritical. They see themselves as exempt from their own policy. So anyway, that's why I do that. As for how I get in, Dinesh, I just walk into every building like I own it. And because there's so many billionaires here, the people who are standing at the door, usually young women with a clipboard, they're not entirely sure I don't own it. So the result is that I'm seldom stopped. And I go in and I find myself talking to prime ministers and royalty and, former presidents of countries. It's quite interesting.
This morning, Trump, he's not there in person, but he delivers a kind of virtual address. And I noticed that Trump did not hold back. I mean, he slams the idea of diversity and affirms the idea of merit. He talks about climate change, quote, nonsense. He says there are only men and women in the world, and there's no third gender. He goes on to say that he talks about the confidence of the United States. He talks about importing huge amounts of foreign investment here to create jobs in this country. I mean, the way I think about it, Trump is articulating in an unabashed way the exact opposite of what the mainstream of the World Economic Forum believes. And for years, these people have operated with the idea that theirs is the only way to think. It is the reigning way to think, and it has been for the last several years. But now there is a kind of new challenger, if you will, on the horizon. So my question is, moving among these guys, listening to Trump, what's going on in their heads?
One word, Dinesh: panic. There's panic. Every other year that I've been to the WEF, there is, they just brim, they exude an unbridled confidence and nothing but disdain for populism, nothing but disdain for democracy, for ordinary people around the world. I mean, it's why I refer to the WEF, the World Economic Forum, as the HOA from hell. I mean, that is really what it is. It's a global HOA. They're busybodies who want to tell everybody else, what to do. And the way I put it is your average conservative, their mindset is to get up in the morning and grab a cup of coffee and think about their day. The average leftist, the average WEFer, gets up in the morning, grabs a cup of coffee, and thinks about your day too. That's just the way that they think. But this year, there's genuine panic. And I want to say this about Trump's address. Javier Milei, his address yesterday was bare-knuckled. It was angry. He let the WEF have it, and particularly on, the sexually perverse agenda. Trump today, I thought was, about an hour ago, it wasn't that long ago that he gave his address, was quite presidential, actually. He was firm in stating America's position. He wasn't in the least apologetic, but he treated all the questioners with great respect. He spoke of his desire to be there and that next year he hopes to be there and see a lot of friends and this kind of thing. But at the same time, he made it very clear in presidential terms, I'm not a globalist. And see, and this is the reason why, Dinesh, I think there's real panic. It isn't just simply that Donald Trump isn't a globalist. He's an anti-globalist. He is a wrecking ball to the globalist agenda. And I don't know if I sent you this. I think maybe I did, but at one of the presentations, you have a panel of individuals who are speaking, and one of them from Harvard's Kennedy School of Government, he said, "Look, what we have seen here in Donald Trump," and I'm close to quoting him, maybe not word for word, but I'm pretty close. He said, "What we've seen, from him has never been done in the history of politics, and that is a resurrection of someone who is politically dead." And we have to realize that our agenda is in serious trouble. And so I think that's what's happening.
Yeah, I think in that very same panel, and I did get this from you, there's another guy who weighs in and makes, I think, an equally striking observation. Namely, he says, listen, we're all talking about how Trump won, how he won. But we also need to pay attention to the fact that we lost. And it's interesting at the World Economic Forum that you could use a term like we, because what he's really saying is that those of us in the room are kind of one mind. My mind flashes back to last year, Larry, and there was a very smarmy woman whose name I don't remember. But what she said, she was speaking to the on the podium, and she said, here we are, and we trust each other. We come from all these different countries, and we trust each other, but none of us are trusted by the people of our own countries. So the trust gap is not among us. We trust each other. In other words, we're all part of a cabal, but in our own countries, there is a populist and popular suspicion of what we represent and what we're trying to do. And I think the significance of Trump is that before Trump, you had the distrust, but you did not have a real alternative. But now what Trump is doing, and you can see that he's doing this in the U.S., but he's doing it globally too, is he's assembling a counter elite to challenge their elites. They are elites in a way. They've got, the kind of titles of the people who show up there, titans of business, titans of government, of media, but there's a rival global right that is represented, I think, by people like Milei. Georgia Maloney perhaps is in that camp, maybe Farage, many others that you and I could think of, maybe Bolsonaro in Brazil, and then, of course, Trump. I don't know if Modi in India belongs in that group. Do you see I'm not expecting this global right to be represented at the World Economic Forum, but are they aware that something like this is going on?
Oh, I think they are. And you're very astute, Dinesh. What we have seen in recent years since 2020 is, let's just take South America, for example. We saw, Chile, the most stable democracy in South America, fall to Marxist. Of course, Venezuela had already gone in that direction. Colombia, Brazil, Honduras, Peru, all in very shady kind of terms. And we saw massive populist uprisings in all of these places. With Trump coming back, in America, globalists do know is the keystone to their entire agenda. If it falls, then, other anti-globalist movements are going to fall with it, other populist movements. But there are real cracks on the other side. For instance, of the G7, none of the heads of state of the G7 were there except the outgoing, president of chancellor of Germany. That's it. And in the past, they have been there. They're not this time. Now, Davos is trying to put a nice, spin on it all. And, give the impression that they're just as significant and as important as they have ever been. But I think you can feel, I come back to that word, I think you can feel panic. I think you can feel defeat.
Of some of this climate action that has really intensified in the last couple of decades, Switzerland has invested, developed some different ways of engaging in preservation, conservation, and management of ecosystems. One example is it's become a place where nature has been granted legal personhood so that ecosystems' rights to exist, to thrive, to regenerate are codified and recognized in Swiss law. And that context has allowed for different people, different communities to bring lawsuits on behalf of rivers, forests, other ecosystems upon which we are intrinsically reliant and connected. So that's what's happening in Switzerland, a little window into what's happening at international scales. What does that look like where you live?
Larry Taunton joins us. Larry Alex Taunton. Larry, what did I just hear? Are they giving personhood to rivers and forests? Is that what they're proposing, sir?
Yes, that is precisely what they're proposing. And your listeners may be wondering, gosh, what's going on with Bannon's, audio there? That actually is not white noise. It's not some kind of interference. The entire time that she's speaking, they have in the background the sound of cicadas and frogs and things of this nature. And she walks out and she tells everyone to close their eyes and to imagine they're 25 years in the future. And then she just keeps talking. But I have maintained all along that Davos, that the World Economic Forum really has as its basis a kind of neo-paganism. And this is really what you're seeing play out in something like this. Now, these are the people who do not want to acknowledge the personhood of a child, but they're talking about giving personhood. That's their terminology, not ours, to rivers, to streams, to mountains, to nature itself, so that nature can sue us to achieve its own rights.
Larry Taunton, why is this neo-paganism? Is there anything neo about it? Isn't this just flat old? Isn't this old-fashioned paganism? I mean, it's very scary. Personhood, for as sacred as personhood is, and they wouldn't give it to fetuses. They'll fight that tooth and nail, but they'll give it to a river or to a mountain in Switzerland, sir.
Yeah, well, it's neo in the sense that it's a kind of resurgent paganism, isn't it? And at the end of the day, the World Economic Forum, as I think Noor could tell you, and this is my third year in a row to attend the forum, it's fundamentally anti-human. I mean, the World Economic Forum slogan is improving the state of the world, but it's quite deceptive. At its core, they really don't care about human beings. And so when Noor is talking about the rise of artificial intelligence and what's going on there, that fits hand in hand with what the World Economic Forum really is. And so this, what I'm referring to as a kind of neo-paganism, these are individuals who reject God. I mean, they just assume there isn't one. And the end result is that they start worshiping and elevating nature and animal life. Now, this particular woman, if you were to watch the entire segment, it's astonishing stuff. I mean, it looks like an SNL skit. It looks like everyone, before they walked in, were going, we're taking a deep hit on some marijuana before they walked into that particular session. But this is quite reflective of what the World Economic Forum is. It's fundamentally pagan, it's fundamentally anti-human.
Larry, Noor said this yesterday in the morning show, again in the evening show, and again right now. Is Davos a cult in your understanding of it? Is Davos a cult?
Yes, I would say that it is, particularly at the policy making, the planner level. Now, I think Noor would agree with me when I say that down at the bottom, a lot of the attendees, they're often people that are just wearing the swag, they're idealists, and they don't really know any better. And then, of course, you have a lot of vendors who are there. But the people who are running the show, they are a cult.
Larry, your initial thoughts, your hot takes on what you just saw with President Trump, this amazing speech, and then 20-minute speech, 20 minutes of Q&A. Thoughts, sir?
Yes. I thought it was terrific, Steve. I appreciated the fact that he was very presidential, but at the same time, he was very firm in stating what the goals actually are. And listen, the people at Davos don't like him, and he doesn't particularly like them. But he nonetheless agreed to speak in their forum, and he made it very clear that he's pro-American. He's not a globalist. And listen, I want to tell you this, and I'm sure Noor has picked up on this as well. There has been genuine panic in Davos this week. I thought I would encounter it, but I've encountered it a lot more than I thought that I would. And I sent you that clip where you had Graham Allison from the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard talking about the resurrection of Trump. They don't like what they're seeing. And it's not merely that Trump is not a globalist, it's that he is a committed anti-globalist. And they know it, and that they know that their a globalist agenda is deeply imperiled, and particularly because, yes, he's lame duck in the sense that he can't run again, but there's the potential here for a 12-year run by MAGA, and I'm just curious to see how that's all going to play out at Davos.
So I almost don't know where to start here. Oh, I forgot to mention your podcast, which is Ideas Have Consequences. And you were telling me that in that podcast, one of your sort of techniques is to dig into the policymakers, what's being floated on the culture, and then dig into how that then actually affects people on the ground.
Yeah, I think what we're seeing, particularly since the pandemic, Drew, is that there's a class of people. I won't call them elites. That's a compliment to them. They are elitists who are insulated from their own ideas. They're insulated from the policies they would make, the policies they promote. And, just by way of example, today I just happened to be, I was in Davos, this is day 2 of the World Economic Forum. And as you're walking along, they're all in these gas guzzling SUVs and luxury sedans. And I want to be clear, I personally like gas guzzling SUVs and luxury sedans, but I don't go around the world lecturing people on their carbon footprint. And that's what these people do. They fly in their private jets, and Drew, they can't be bothered to take a luxury sedan from the airport into Davos. They helicopter in and then get into their luxury sedans. I didn't see anybody eating bugs today. In fact, I saw quite a lot of beef being consumed.
And does anybody ever bring this to their attention or confront them about it? And I wonder what their reaction is or has been.
Well, interestingly, there have been those who have pointed this out. The individuals, for instance, like, say, a Bill Gates, who is a member of the World Economic Forum. But their response is what you would expect it to be. These are individuals who are extraordinary. I mean, you've met them, I've met them. These are people who are extraordinarily arrogant, and they think that they are an exemption to all the rules that they would like to force down on the rest of us.
I have noticed that is generally a conceit of people that are big fans of centralized governments. I've really I'm not a political scientist, but I've been watching things rather carefully these last 5 years. And I've noticed there is definitely people that feel as though people are generally bad and they can only be rendered toward the good by a omnipotent, kind, incredibly wise, centralized authority. And then there's people like me who believe that people are generally pretty good. And as soon as you centralize anything, you screw that up.
Yeah, well, I think that's well put. These are individuals who, worship the state. And the way that I like to put it, in a way that maybe makes sense to regular people who don't, spend their lives hanging out with people like this, is the average person is of a conservative mindset, which is kind of what you've described just a moment ago. And those are people who get up in the morning and they get a cup of coffee and they begin to think about their day. These are individuals who get up in the morning, they get a cup of coffee, and they begin thinking about your day too. They want to think about your day. And it's because they can't tolerate the idea that somebody somewhere is doing something that they don't like. It's the way they think.
What kind of speeches have you heard?
Well, some amazing ones. But, much of the WEF is online. 70% of it is online. So I don't know that people would need me to be there to dissect that for them. What is more interesting is to move among the 2,700 other people who attend. They're the rank and file who will, in some sense, seek to enact, mobilize these particular policies and so on that are being suggested. And what you hear are things like the need to bring down the global population from, let's say, 8 billion to less than 2 billion. I mean, they say these things. You hear them talking about, the carbon footprint. You talk about them hearing, and this is a word, Drew, that you can give to your audience. It is the new final solution. That phrase wasn't known in the West until Nuremberg. And then they were going like, what? You guys keep talking about, final solution. You're talking about the annihilation of European Jews. Well, the new final solution is sustainability. That word is freighted with all kinds of anti-human meaning, and whatever comes behind it is not good. So they'll talk about population sustainability, agricultural sustainability, economic sustainability. In my hotel room, there's something there about, do I want my towels washed? And it speaks of, environmental sustainability, these kinds of things. And this is what they talk about there. And you have to listen carefully about what they're promoting and what they're pushing, but it's fundamentally anti-human. This is my third year in a row at the WEF, at the World Economic Forum. And this is the first year that I sense panic. And that is because they know that Trump is not merely not on board with globalism, but he's a fierce anti-globalist. And he not within the first day, but within hours, was sending the very strong message that there's a new sheriff in town and he's nothing like the old, demented, corrupt previous sheriff. And things are going to be very different. And you can feel that vibe in Davos. In fact, Trump wasn't at the WEF today. It felt like he was there. His presence, the Trump effect, is sending ripples through the World Economic Forum. And frankly, I love it.
Are we going to be able to sort of blow the lid off, so to speak, of what's going on over there to get people to kind of look at things anew?
Well, I think with people like you very kindly having me on your show and bringing some attention to this, I think I was discussing this earlier today with a friend. I think just a few years ago, almost no one knew anything about the World Economic Forum. But as you point out, since the pandemic, I think that's changed. I think people are now looking to shows like yours. They're looking to alternative media. They no longer just accept what's being told to them by their media. They're trying to do some of their own research, and they're much more locked in to what is happening at the World Economic Forum. So that in my case, with my own, very limited fan base and my Twitter following, they are very keyed in and following what I'm doing over there. They want to know. They want me to post video. They want me to post interviews. They want me to post my opinion about what's taking place there. And hence the reason that I'm here for the third year in a row.
Didn't Musk show up last year? Wasn't he there?
I don't think he was here last year, but he has been here before. Javier Milei was really the anti-globalist star who came last year and kind of lectured the WEF on why they're wrong about pretty much everything. And I believe he's going to be here again this year. And I think the WEF likes to do that because, I was talking about, how CNN used to like to have, the token conservative. Well, the WEF is very similar. For the most part, their speakers, the people that they feature, are all on board with globalism, but they want to give the appearance that, yes, we're listening. So let's have a Jewish rabbi speak, and let's have some sort of anti-globalist come. But that's just to try to give the appearance that they're fair-minded when they're not.
Is there anything that can be done other than sort of tending to our own garden?
Well, I think we continue to bring attention to this, talking about what's happening here. Again, the population agenda is very, very real. I mean, their founding documents are all about that. But one of their agenda contributors, Dr. Dennis Meadows, is a guy, you can find him on YouTube. In other words, you don't have to accept what I say on Ideas Have Consequences. We can go straight to what these guys themselves say. And they use language, Drew, that they don't use words like we need to kill people or human beings. They talk about sustainability. We need to create population sustainability. And when they talk about that, they say very openly that the Earth's population has exceeded its carrying capacity, and we need to reduce it by, a casual 6 or 7 billion people. I think people are waking up to that. I also think we have to hold our own politicians accountable and make them toe the line. Most of these globalists, they have been told to ignore their constituencies. I don't think we let them ignore their constituencies. And I think the American people decided they weren't going to let the Biden administration ignore them. And they spoke decisively in November.
What is the final solution? What, are they just trying to bring down the birth rate, or is it something more sinister?
Well, all of this comes out, Drew. You may recall a book. I remember having to look at it when I was in college or graduate school, called The Population Explosion. It was published, Paul Ehrlich, in 1968. It was a massive bestseller, and it affected governments around the world. This was a guy who was saying that within the next 10 years, so by the mid-70s, billions of people were going to die around the world. And Kennedy was,
I was there. I was part of the ecology movement in the mid 70s. And there was going to be, first of all, we had a global ice age coming. Secondly, acid rain was going to destroy agriculture in this country. Thirdly, these are just some of our positions. Thirdly, there'd be no oil in about 4 years. Fourthly, there would be famine worldwide because we had outstripped the ability to provide food for the world. Guaranteed, billions are going to die in famine, period, end of story. It begged no conversation. We just did the math, that was that. And the one thing that all these people, having been a part of it, never take into account is human ingenuity, the ability of human beings to solve problems when they're presented with them. That is not, they're in some sort of world of steady state where the present moment defines everything in the future. And it's never the case.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. Ehrlich's population explosion has been debunked many times over since its publication in 68, but its influence was massive, so that the Club of Rome, some of your listeners will be familiar with that, issued a white paper. It wasn't a publication for the general public, but sent to various thinkers in 1970, called The Predicament of Mankind. And out of that came the founding of the World Economic Forum in 1971. Oh, wow. And Dennis Meadows wrote a book that was, sold, or they gave away, 30 million copies, called Limits to Growth. And again, the focus was on population. And you would think that by now they would have let that go. Kind of your point earlier. Why wouldn't somebody see this doesn't work? Musk himself tweets about this frequently, that in fact we're facing population collapse in many parts of the world, but they maintain this doggedly. And so at the end of the day, it feels to me, Drew, like really what they've created is a kind of neo-paganism. And you can kind of feel it in Davos. It feels like there's this kind of weird kind of earth worship that kind of goes on there. And so it's hard to hold my tongue, but it's going to sit in the meetings that I listen and I ask questions and try not to doubt myself.
Well, I get the seductive quality of all that. I think some of the most interesting people are people that change their opinions, and that would be me, one of them, as it pertains to this experience. And I, I think it's worthwhile talking to people that were enthusiasts during the 70s, because we knew it all. We knew it all. And in the 70s, the present moment is exactly like the 70s in terms of all the excesses of the last 10 years. I can't believe we did this again, but here we are doing it again. And it eventually got taken over by good ideas and enthusiasm and people raising families and doing their work and doing good work and all the things that humans thrive, humans just at their best moving forward. And then we hit it again now for some reason, but I don't know. Keeps happening. But let me, before we wrap up, did you ever interview Rob Henderson and his notion of luxury ideas?
I have not.
You familiar with his notion?
I really am not familiar with him. Why don't you tell me a bit about him?
He's a sociologist. He was a troubled kid growing up in a economically distressed part of California. He eventually found his way. He's got an interesting story. He wrote a book about it, and it's going to be a movie. He eventually found his way into the military. Military got him to straighten out, amazingly, as a result of the military collegiate. It's got a name. The military, the veterans. What's it called? The veterans. Anyway, they've got a way for veterans to be able to go straight to college and be paid for. He got into Yale. He comes to Yale, and he starts. GI Bill. He starts studying sociology, and the first thing that strikes him is how these kids have these ideas about him, about his community and his world, and they have no idea what they're talking about. And then he ended up going to Oxford or Cambridge and became a decorated PhD sociologist and actually a social psychologist. And he writes about these luxury ideas all the time, that the people that have these ideologies, like the people in the World Economic Forum, are not people like him who've lived like that and who understand those communities, go back to those communities. And you were saying that's something you like doing, is going into the communities, going to the ground level where these policies are having their effect.
Yeah, well, let me give you a perfect example of what you're talking about. Last year, I decided that I was going to go to Poland and interview some of the refugees they were pouring into Ukraine. Now, I've been into Ukraine many times. I've written a book about child trafficking, human trafficking in that country. I've also been in Russia many times. So here I am. I've been there, and unrelated, I go to the World Economic Forum, and one of the meetings that I sneak into is with former British Prime Minister Theresa May, talking about all the wonderful things they're doing for Ukrainian refugees that are pouring into Poland. So I raised my hand and I find myself talking to her, and I said, have you been there? Because I may be the only person who's actually in this room who's actually been to Poland and seen these refugees. And you know what they're saying? No one is doing anything for them. And certainly not the World Economic Forum. And what's funny, if I were to show you the pictures, Drew, the first photo shows her greeting me with a big smile. And the progression of her smile disappearing from her face as I'm pressing her on these questions. But the point is, it's all this idealistic talk, a luxury idea, that the fact of the matter is, they don't care about these people, and they're not affected by their own ideas.
Larry, I appreciate you being here. Keep up the good work. I hope you'll come back and report in again soon. And we'll look for the podcast, Ideas Have Consequences, as they certainly do. And Larry Alex Taunton can be found on Twitter and also LarryAlexTaunton.com. Larry, thank you so much for being here.
Great thing to do.
Larry, welcome back to the program. Nice to see you again.
Hey, Steve, it is great to be with you from Switzerland.
Yeah, we were talking in the break here, and I feel like you kind of said you feel kind of dirty. You've been there since Monday. You can't wait to leave. You're on your way to Rome. Excuse me. But you can't help but feel dirty by being there. Like you want to get in a shower after you hear these people talk. I'm not wrong about that, am I?
No, I've been spending my time with a bunch of globalist scumbags. And the result of that is that, honestly, I can't wait to leave. What you were just talking about just a second ago, I mean, you just walk along, and these are all people who are flying in on their private jets, helicoptering in from the airport, driving these big gas guzzling, luxury sedans. And I'm not joking when I say this. I watched a lot of beef being consumed and zero bugs.
No insects on the menu, Larry. I'm shocked to hear that.
None.
Look, this is the way this whole deal operates, though. They'll dictate on high to the whole world. From their globalist pulpit, they'll say, here's Edict 1 and Edict 2, and you'll do this, and you won't drive cars, you'll have a mule cart, and you'll eat insects and nonsense. They don't believe any of that crap, by the way, but they want to dictate to the rest of us how we live. How big of a disruption is this week to the globalists in Davos? Because here comes Donald Trump, an anti-globalist, the leader of the biggest populist movement maybe in American history or possibly world history, upsetting the apple cart in ways they didn't think was possible. And here he comes again, and he's ready to do battle with the globalists, if you will. I mean, they've got to be having a very bad week.
Steve, will you permit me a fist pump? I mean, what has been really interesting is, this isn't my first time to the World Economic Forum. This is my third year in a row being here, and this is the first time that I've sensed genuine panic. I mean, you would think Donald Trump had been at the World Economic Forum this week. It's almost like he has been, because you feel his presence there. But the Trump effect is real, and they know that the globalist agenda is in peril, because Trump is, just the way you put it, he's not merely not a globalist, he's an anti-globalist.
Absolutely. He's a wrecking ball to all of their nonsense. For whatever you think of Donald Trump, and I think right now 77 million Americans are breathing a sigh of relief and celebrating the fact that he's here and he's closing the border and he's changing people at the head of the Coast Guard for being woke and all these things that are happening. He's releasing political prisoners as he sees it and giving them full pardons and sending them on their way after 4 years. For the globalists, they've got to be in anaphylactic shock right now, politically speaking, because they can't take it. And he is an anti-globalist. He's pro-American, pro-free market. He stands for everything that they're trying to tear down. It's going to be a tough 4 years for them. And if he has a good 4 years, then J.D. Vance takes the helm afterwards and continues to tear down this nonsense, right?
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. Listen, the World Economic Forum at its core is fascist. And I know that those terms are thrown around. They're thrown around very casually. I mean, supposedly Elon Musk, is this fascist with the Nazi salute. Absolutely ridiculous. Yeah. Absolutely ridiculous. But what they are about is the strict regimentation of corporations for the purpose of war against domestic populations. I mean, that's who they are. They're about the suppression of free speech. They are about saving the planet. They say, the World Economic Forum, their slogan is, improving the state of the world. But they don't really care about human beings. Indeed, I would say that they're fundamentally anti-human.
Yeah, I would agree with that. What are some, and he's, so I'm going to look at a couple of things. Donald Trump took the restrictions of water off from washing machines and shower heads and toilets. That was one of the executive orders yesterday. That takes us all the way back to Bill Clinton, who made our toilets not flush properly because they want to reduce water. And this is one of the things that these are just examples of things that would upset and enrage the globalist Green New Dealers, climate change, tree huggers, bunny lovers, all of that, right? And it's just an example of the small things that can be done that really upset them. Look, he doesn't care about Davos. He doesn't care about the World Economic Forum. He pulled us out of the World Health Organization day one. These are big signals to the world that there is a whole different deal coming. So what do? They can't stop America. If we go and we produce energy the way he says we're going to, if we close our border and stop this free flow of illegals into our country, which has been one of their cornerstones at Davos, to let the world be invaded by others, what do? They can't stop him. It's pretty obvious. They tried. For a long time, for 10 years, they've tried to stop him. And guess what? He's back.
What is very interesting about Donald Trump, and you sort of touch on it here, is here's a guy who really did come from the ranks of the elitists. And yet he's a guy who has rubbed elbows with real human beings in the United States, chiefly, and around the world. Now, part of what I seek to do, Steve, is I'm engaging at a place like Davos with those people who float ideas that they are never actually affected by downstream. And so I go from here. You mentioned I'll be in Rome, but I'll also be in Egypt. And there I'm going to be engaging with people who are, third worlders who are deeply, deeply affected by the kind of policies that these elitists make. And you see, they all live in a bubble. They're not touched by these things.
Maybe Donald Trump is the anti-FDR. That's what you made me think here. Both came from the elitist background. FDR tried to turn us into a leftist country. Donald Trump saying, we're done with all of that. We're going the other way. And these are both people that came from very well-heeled backgrounds and went a different way. FDR brought political change in a dramatic way, and Donald Trump's doing the exact same thing, I believe. And with some luck here and some good policies, the midterms will be successful for him as well. Larry, I'm going to give you the last word here. You got about a minute. Give me your thoughts about where we go from here, from Davos, Donald Trump, globally, Egypt, Rome, the impact that he's a global phenomenon. He's not just an American president. He is a global phenomenon. Go ahead.
Well, I'll just add to that by saying that he's very popular with common people around the world. And let me just give you an example of that. When I get into a taxi in a place like Egypt or in a place like Morocco or, here, what you find is that Donald Trump is quite popular. Now, he's not popular with elitists, with the champagne swilling sorts anywhere in the world. But Davos is fascinating. I found myself having lunch yesterday with a lot of the drivers, guys who are driving for heads of state and for the some 600 CEOs representing major corporations here. And what you found is that they're all kind of quietly giving the thumbs up and are very excited about Donald Trump.
Yeah.
Yes, they like him a lot.
Larry, here's what I like. When you get all wrapped up there, maybe you can come back next week, give us a summary of all you went through. Make sure you shower well, Larry. I don't want you to bring any of that stuff home with you. Larry, Alex Taunton, always nice to see you, my friend. Good luck for the rest of the week.
Hey, thank you, Steve. You take care.